Well, let me ask you about Michele Bullock's appointment. Was she always a lay-down misere in recent weeks, or did the government give real consideration to either Stephen Kennedy or Jenny Wilkinson getting the job?
Oh no, I think there was a very serious process that was gone through, and there were excellent candidates who were putting themselves, who were there to be chosen for this really important role within our country. But Michele Bullock is an outstanding choice. She does bring to bear enormous expertise, great leadership, but also tremendous experience with the bank. She's somebody who comes from humble beginnings, so she absolutely knows the value of a dollar in a household budget. But she has had a life spent at the Reserve Bank, and I think is in a fantastic position to lead the Reserve Bank at a time when, having done the review of the Reserve Bank, and we seek for it to be really world's best practice in terms of a central bank, she's in a great position to lead the implementation of that review. So we're very excited about her appointment, and we think it's going to herald a great era for the Reserve Bank.
Is there a danger politically here for you that people aren't really fond of Phil Lowe, and you have appointed his deputy who's been at the bank for 38 years?
Oh, look, I think the Reserve Bank acts independently. We seek for the Reserve Bank to be the best central bank in the world. I mean, that's our aspiration, and that's why we put in place the review of the bank that we did in over the course of the last 12 months, and it's come up with some really important recommendations. We want that to be implemented, but we want it to be implemented from the perspective of experience, and that's what Michele Bullock brings to bear here. And I think she's going to do a fantastic job. Now, you know, we face the economic conditions that we do. We need the Reserve Bank to be the best it can be, but at the same time, you know, from the government's point of view, we need to be managing the fiscal environment in a way which does put downward pressure on interest rates and which provides relief for cost of living. And that's what we're going to be focused upon, and that's what we expect to be judged upon.
How many more rate rises is the government expecting this year?
Oh, I'm not going to comment on that. I mean, ultimately, that is a matter for the Reserve Bank. What we know is that there is a difficult international environment from which Australia is not immune. And what we need to do as a government, which we are doing, is be completely focused on using every mechanism within our power to provide relief for Australian household budgets in the face of that. And that's been our focus, as I've said, from the moment that we came to government, and will continue to be so. At the heart of the budget that we handed down last October was really relief for cost of living. At the heart of the budget that we handed down in May was the same. This is the issue that we are focused on, and we know Australians are doing it tough, and we will continue to be there standing next to them during this difficult time to provide that relief.
Well, a lot of Australians will be hanging out for those stage 3 tax cuts beginning 24-25, won't they? And I guess the hope of the government would be inflation's calmed down by then, which makes them less inflationary.
Well, we'll see what happens with inflation. I mean, what we know is that there is a difficult global environment that was in place prior to us coming to power. And again, we are just going to be focused on the task day in, day out, of providing relief where we can to Australian household budgets, and making sure that the way in which we manage the fiscal environment for our country is one which does not put pressure on inflation. And that's why, you know, we've done something that the Liberals never did, and that is deliver a surplus. Which,
but stage 3 stays as is. Stage 3 stays as is, doesn't it?
Well, that's where our policy's at, you know, again, we are focused on all the issues that we can in terms of making sure that we are putting as much downward pressure on inflation and giving as much relief in terms of cost of living as possible.
Let me ask about the announcement of the Bushmasters by the PM at NATO. Now, Greg Sheridan said about this, he said, quote, "It's a bare minimum you could do." He says, "There's no reason we could not give substantially more Bushmasters to the Ukrainians and simply build more of them in Australia to replace those we donate. But the crazy budgetary restrictions the government has imposed on defence means that's unlikely." What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think people need to just take a step back and look at the commitment that we are making to Ukraine relative to the rest of the world. We are the largest, well, really, with Sweden going into NATO, we will be the largest non-NATO contributor to the support of Ukraine in its war against Russia. That is a fact which is not lost on Europe and certainly not lost on Ukraine, and they are very grateful for that. We've been providing armoured vehicles in the context in the means of Bushmasters, but not just Bushmasters, M113s, and that's been at the heart of the request that has been asked of us by Ukraine and indeed our partners with the United States and the United Kingdom. With the deployment of 100 personnel to Germany to support the E7 Wedgetail, we now have 2 deployments on foot in Germany and also in Britain in training new recruits into the Ukrainian armed forces. 2 deployments supporting those supporting Ukraine in its conflict against Russia. So I think the world acknowledges that we are punching above our weight in the support that we're providing Ukraine. But we are very proud and pleased to be doing that because we believe that Australia's national interest is engaged in Ukraine. This is an affront to the rules-based order to see Russia invade a smaller neighbour, not by reference to international law, but by reference to power and might. And just as the international rules-based order is under pressure in Eastern Europe, it's under pressure in the Indo-Pacific, which is why we want to stand for it and believe countries around the world need to do the same. So I think we can stand, and Australians can feel confident that Australia stands very proudly in the level of support that it's providing Ukraine, and that's how we should be judged.
All right, well, Sheridan there spoke about, in his words, crazy budgetary restrictions. Are you being done over as Defence Minister by Treasury and the Treasurer when it comes to no new funding for defence? We saw no new money in the forward estimates.
Well, what we see over the course of the decade is an increase in the defence budget of 0.2% of GDP. That's about 10% of the defence budget over the course of the next decade. And that's over and above what we committed at the last election. When we went to the election in May of last year, we did so committing to precisely the same defence spending envelope as was committed by the former government. Now, we've maintained that. We're maintaining that over the forward estimates, which does see growth in the defence budget. And we're not only maintaining that over the next decade, but we are growing the defence budget by an additional 10% over and above that. So the idea that there isn't a commitment to defence is patently ridiculous. We are doing more in the commitment to defence and in defence spending than the former Liberal national government, and that's the standard against which we should be judged, and that's the point that people should understand. We've maintained every commitment that we took to the last election and more. So we need to be doing that, I might say, because I think we are facing the most challenging and threatening strategic circumstances that we have since the end of the Second World War. But the point I've consistently made is we will commit to the same level of funding as the former government. We've done that and more. And we will look at defence spending against the fact that in a rational world, defence spending should be a function of strategic complexity and strategic threat. We are rational people, and that is being reflected in the growth of the defence budget over the next decade.